English experience of law commissions offers more than, as one of our previous speakers described, the common law as being there as a gap filler. I quite like the idea of the English common law as a sort of polyfiller, but I think the Law Commission can do more. And my understanding is, having looked at the Law Commissioner model in Cyprus, that this is quite a different function. My understanding of the Law Commissioner role within Cyprus is that it's about harmonisation, revision, translation, consolidation of the statute book as it exists, whereas the Law Commission of England and Wales has a much broader remit. So the reason that I feel qualified to speak about this is that I was the Criminal Law Commissioner for almost 10 years, working within the Law Commission of England and Wales, along with the other 4 commissioners throughout that period. And I wanted to start by saying the value of a law commission shouldn't be underestimated. Without being too grandiose, I think it enhances the rule of law, and it enhances a country's global reputation. If you have a law commission and you're producing quality, independent legislative reform, that can only be good for the nation itself. So the Law Commission of England and Wales, as you may know, has a venerable history now. It was founded in 1965, in part because prior to that we'd had only ad hoc law reform entirely at the happenstance of whoever was in power in government. And the 1965 legislation not only created the institution, but also set its parameters, including the duty, which I used to remind myself of too often, the duty to keep the law of England and Wales under review on a daily basis. We were supposed to look across the 10,000 criminal offences and decide what needed to be changed every so often. One of the key benefits of having an independent organisation funded by government, but they're on the statute book with permanence, with tenure for the individuals, is of course the opportunity for independent law reform. So although government wouldn't necessarily invite the Law Commission to take on projects that were too contentious, and nor would the Law Commission want to take on some projects that would be too socially contentious. There was much debate about whether or not for assisted suicide or euthanasia would ever be appropriate for a law commission. But it is appropriate for them to take on work relating to the mechanics of law, where there is a problem which arises because of a legal defect rather than some social defect, then it is appropriate. So the autonomy given to the institution by the fact that you have this statute, you have the funding guaranteed, you have independence, you have the tenure of the officers, including a member of the Court of Appeal as the chair, so that that individual carries all of the weight, the gravitas of that office, along with other commissioners, either of standing in the academic or legal professional community. And the other advantage, of course, is that having created the institution, it develops an expertise. So there is a body of, the current Law Commission in England and Wales has around 60 people working there. Not only do you have expert lawyers who are hired for individual projects, but there is a core of the lawyers who remain in post, and they develop an understanding and expertise on law reform process. In addition, the Law Commission has, in England and Wales at least, has economists. That may seem very odd, but let me tell you, from the many meetings I had with ministers, quite often the attraction of a law reform project was when you mentioned the potential savings. I remember, in relation to the sentencing codification project on which I led, speaking to a minister and saying this will save £250 million over the next 10 years. And I could see the pound note signs rolling round in their eyes at that moment. So the economists will predict likely savings, cost savings on a piece of legislative reform. There is also the quality of the product, because the Law Commission of England and Wales has embedded within it drafters taken from the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, that organisation within this jurisdiction which is responsible for producing all of the legislation. And when they're embedded within the Commission itself, they, I was going to say infect, but it's a more positive, they influence every aspect of the decision making. When you're taking on the project, they will say, I wouldn't even touch that because you will never be able to define that satisfactorily in statute, all the way through. Let me just go back to that point I made about process, which I think is really important. When you have an institution that's created with that independence, it allows the individuals there to generate this expertise, in particular in consultation. And the body becomes trusted for its product, for the quality of its product, because of the extent, the serious extent of its consultation processes, and the iterative nature of that. When I was there, I remember on one project, we spoke to over 1,400 individuals and organisations to make sure that we were developing a consensus. And it wasn't one forum where we would go out and speak to them. We would be going back almost on a daily or weekly basis, chipping away at the problem and going back to people, and eventually sometimes winning round the reluctant individuals, so that there is, as I say, by the time you complete the project, not only better quality, but you have developed a consensus which allows for a smoother passage of legislation that is created. So from a government's point of view, why would you want to create a law commission? Well, it's, apart from being quite a cheap organisation, or good value, I should say, rather than cheap, low cost, but huge potential benefit. When the Law Commission produces a product of quality, then of course the government can claim it as its own. It can enact the legislative reforms recommended by the Law Commission, and the Law Commission might get some mention, but these will be seen as positive government steps to solve a legal problem. On other occasions, it might suit the government to distance itself, to pass the buck to the Law Commission. This is too topical, this is too sensitive an issue. We'll let the Law Commission deal with this, and then we can say the independent body has recommended this to us. Not our recommendation, but that's what the independent watchdog says, so we better enact it. Sometimes that is their desire. The enhanced reputation, I think, from the government of recognising the need for an independent voice on legislation is also of value to the government. And then, as I've mentioned, when the legislation that is produced by the Law Commission is taken forward, it's so much easier for the government to deal with, to enact, to persuade Parliament that this should be enacted, because it has that independent, trusted source, the Law Commission, and it comes with a degree of consensus from the relevant stakeholders. And I can think of many examples of that across different spheres when I was in post at the Commission. On matters of commercial law, we reformed, I say we, the commercial team rather than me, reformed the law of insurance, for example, which was at that time over a century old and really rather dated, arcane in many ways. But by reforming that over a period of almost 10 years, incrementally, building a consensus, that had an enormous impact on the insurance industry in this country and maintained the relevance of the insurance industry, and no doubt investment in this country in that regard. So that was well worth doing. Similarly with things like pensions, planning, all of those things gave us security. When people knew what the planning legislation was going to be in Wales, they were more likely to want to invest their corporation there, their huge warehouses there and so on, because they knew that they were secure. I think it's also valuable, of course, because you have an independent organisation that can adopt a principled approach to law reform rather than a politicised approach to law reform. It's going to be looking at equality and modernisation, justice and inclusivity and so on. And will look more comparatively, as John was saying. There's always great value in looking to what other jurisdictions are doing in a particular area. Subject to the caveat that there's always a risk, I think, of sort of legal tourism, where you think, oh, this is rather nice, we'll have one of those and we'll just transplant that back into English law. And it never quite works like that. It's rather like going on holiday and having that delicious glass of white wine in the beautiful Mediterranean heat, and then you buy 10 bottles of that and take them home, and they're not that tasty actually on a cold, wet English evening. So with that caveat, there is a great opportunity to look around the world and see what else has been done. Can I just mention finally, future-proofing? One of the roles of a law commission is to have the vision to look beyond the short-term attention span of ministers, and understandably, I don't say that in a pejorative sense. Ministers know that they have a short time in office and they want to achieve something of significance, leaving a legacy. The Law Commission has an opportunity to look beyond that. So the Law Commission can say, what are we going to be doing about digital assets in 10 years' time? What will the law, family law look like in 10 years' time? What can we do to meet forthcoming challenges, to future-proof the law? And some of the work at the Law Commission, particularly in recent years, has been fantastic in that respect, looking at digital assets, autonomous vehicles, and so on. And some of those things will have a global appeal and make the jurisdiction that much more attractive for investment. My final point is you can be even more radical in your law reform if you wish, which is to try to identify legal problems before they even arise. So the traditional model of law reform is for a law to be in place, an error or difficulty with that law comes to light and it needs to be reformed, and the law reform body is then tasked with that responsibility. Another way of law reforming in some areas is to identify how you can prevent that legal problem from ever arising, particularly in a digital world. So just to give you a very simple example, and I will make space for make way for the Master of the Rolls. A very simple example. In this country at the moment, it's an offence to fail to report when you have an accident in your vehicle. So you're driving along, you have an accident, you must report that to the police. That's simple enough. Fast forward 20 years or 30 years when we're all in autonomous vehicles and they're all driving around and we're sat in the back relaxing. What happens to that responsibility to report accidents, assuming that they will have accidents? Well, you could wait until that happens and then produce a law reform to deal with it. Or you could anticipate that now and say we're going to produce regulation that requires the software programmers in the production of the autonomous vehicles to ensure that the vehicle will self-report if it believes itself to have had an accident. So you legislate in anticipation, and then the problem never arises. Now that takes quite some vision, but that's the kind of thing that the expertise and the opportunity for consensus and consultation within the Law Commission, that's the kind of thing that it is capable of doing to look into the future. Not just in relation to things like autonomous vehicles, really fundamental democratic principles like elections and so on. Where will elections be? How will people be voting in 20, 30 years' time in a digital world? How do we safeguard democracy in that kind of futuristic, scientific, sci-fi world almost? But that's, I know, a very short overview of some of the benefits I think flow from having an institution independent of government for law reform. But I hope it was of value.